Gray Harris was no stranger to difficult negotiations or high-stakes financial storms. At 33, he led Harris and Shaw, a formidable investment advisory firm known for quietly orchestrating some of the most influential deals in the global finance sector. Rival companies grudgingly respected him. Junior analysts at major banks whispered his name with awe. From the outside looking in, Gray Harris seemed untouchable, a man who navigated billion-dollar buyouts with calm assurance. Yet, for all his boardroom composure, Gray struggled with a storm of another kind, the personal, internal variety that no amount of money could quell. Sleepless nights haunted him, anxiety quietly gnawing at his edges. 6 months prior, he lost his father to a sudden illness, and the grief had burrowed deep. His father wasn't just a parent, but also the earliest mentor who taught him the fundamentals of wise investment and cautious optimism. Since his father's death, Gray found the hustle and bustle of his life hollow. Work was the only thing keeping him going, a life raft in a sea of emotional disarray. It was a dark winter day when fate decided to test him even further. He'd stayed too late at the office, a towering high-rise in downtown Westbridge City, finalizing the terms of a major corporate expansion. By the time he left, it was nearly 9 in the evening, and the sky overhead churned with ominous clouds. Wind gusted through the streets, swirling scraps of paper and old leaves. Gray slid into the driver's seat of his sleek Aston Martin, a car that usually symbolized his success. Tonight, it felt as though it were just a metal shell offering meager shelter from the growing tempest inside and out. No sooner did he merge onto the highway than the skies opened up. Fat raindrops pelted the windshield in unrelenting sheets, the wipers swishing furiously yet struggling to keep pace. Headlights of oncoming traffic glared like ghostly orbs in the watery haze. Gray gripped the wheel, mind drifting to his silent penthouse. He dreaded the emptiness. The city's neon glow usually comforted him, but tonight he found it strangely oppressive, as though the watery reflection on the roads mocked his facade of composure. He tried to drown his thoughts by flicking on the radio, but the static-laden weather report offered no solace, just warnings about the intensifying storm, flash floods, and strong winds. Great, he thought with a wry half-smile. As if the day hadn't been draining enough, now nature conspired to challenge him further. He was halfway home, exhausted, numb with grief still fresh in his heart, when he glimpsed something that shattered his autopilot focus on the road. A lone figure struggled along the shoulder, hunched under a flimsy coat, rain drenching them head to toe. They seemed to cling to a worn backpack, barely upright in the relentless storm. Gray felt a pang in his chest, another city traveler left at nature's mercy. In another time, maybe he would have driven past, telling himself he was too busy or that they might not appreciate a random man pulling over. But something in him, some spark of empathy he didn't know was still alive, forced him to press the brakes. The car slowed, tires splashing on the soaked pavement. He inched onto the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. Rain hammered the roof like a million tiny fists. Through the windshield, he saw the figure pause, uncertain. Gray lowered the passenger window just an inch, water spattering in. "Excuse me," he called, voice raised above the din of the storm. "Are you all right? Do you need a ride?" The figure, a woman, he realized, pushed sopping hair from her face. Amy Dawson had just finished a late shift at the cafe near the industrial district, missing her usual bus by mere minutes. With the train lines shut early due to the severe weather and cabs scarce, she was stranded miles from her small apartment. The relentless downpour had drenched her coat, sweater, even her shoes. She'd tried calling for an Uber, but her phone was dead. She was on the verge of tears, physically and mentally drained. At first, caution spiked her nerves. Stranger danger in the middle of a storm, and he was just a silhouette in a fancy car. But desperation and exhaustion weighed heavier. "If you don't mind," she said, voice trembling from the cold, "I just need to get somewhere dry." She half expected him to sigh or wave her off. To her relief, he simply nodded, leaning across to unlock the passenger door. "Come on, let's get you out of this rain." She opened the door and slid into the seat, wincing at how water dripped from her entire body onto the plush leather. I'm sorry about the mess," she stammered. Adrenaline still coursed through her, the warmth of the car a sudden shock to her system. He offered a small, reassuring smile. No worries. It's just water. I'm gray, by the way. He rummaged behind the seats, producing a small gym towel. He handed it to her, ignoring the water spattering on his expensive interior. Amy, she managed, hugging her wet backpack. Thank you, Gray. This storm is brutal. She shivered, half in disbelief that a random driver had stopped. He flicked the seat warmers on, cranking up the heater. Water dripped from her jeans, forming small puddles near her feet. His chest unexpectedly warmed at her gratitude. He asked softly, "Where can I take you?" She nibbled her lip, uncertain if it was safe to reveal her exact address to a stranger. But the practical side recognized she had few choices. My apartment is near Oak Ridge Avenue. It's some distance. If you could drop me anywhere decently lit, I can handle the rest. Gray glanced at the clock glowing on the dashboard, nearly midnight. The storm only grew fiercer, wind rattling the car. Something in him refused to let her face that walk in these conditions. I can drive you all the way, he offered. No sense making you trek through this deluge, if that's okay with you. Her eyes flickered with relief. All right, she said softly, giving cross streets. Thank you. And so they set off, water streaming down the windshield. The hush of the storm enveloped them, while inside the car, an uneasy but growing sense of trust formed between two strangers tossed together by fate. The drive was quiet at first, interrupted only by the rhythmic slash of wipers and distant thunderclaps. Gray gripped the wheel more tightly than usual, part from the slick roads, part from the odd swirl in his chest at having a stranger in his passenger seat. Normally, he avoided all risk or unpredictability. Yet tonight, something propelled him to let a random event take the reins. Amy, for her part, pressed her soaked backpack to her chest, half embarrassed by her dripping clothes and half grateful for the reprieve from the storm. She occasionally stole glances at Gray's profile, noticing faint lines of strain near his eyes, as though he carried a heavy burden behind his polite manner. They found a small thread of conversation in fits and starts. She explained she was behind on rent, working late shifts, saving for night classes in design. He murmured about heading home after a particularly stressful day. She teased lightly that he must be a big shot to drive an Aston Martin, but he dodged direct details, simply calling it a decent car. The friendly banter relaxed them both, bridging the gap between corporate titan and cafe worker. After navigating half-flooded roads, they finally turned onto a narrow street lined with aging apartments. Most windows were dark. The power had likely gone out hours ago. Puddles glistened under flickering street lamps. Gray pulled up in front of a rundown complex, noticing how water pooled in the courtyard. Broken pieces of trash whipped around under fierce gusts. Amy swallowed. She hated revealing the place she lived, so far removed from any sense of comfort. She forced a shaky smile. Thanks, I can run in from here. Gray examined the half-flooded walkway, the battered front door, the flickering light overhead. He frowned, something in him recoiling at the idea of leaving her in a building that might lose power entirely in this monstrous storm. Amy, it's not safe, he blurted, surprising even himself. Your power looks out. The storm's only intensifying. Are you sure you'll be okay alone? She tried to muster bravado. I've handled outages before. Candles and pots for leaks, you know? I'll manage. But the wind howled, rattling a loose metal gutter. Water hammered the roof so violently it sounded on the brink of collapse. Concern twisted Gray's gut. He'd rarely cared about a random person's welfare this strongly. Yet the idea of her stuck in a pitch-black, possibly leaky apartment gnawed at him. An impulsive thought slipped from his lips before he could analyze the potential awkwardness. You could come with me. My place. I have electricity at least. Realizing how that sounded, he quickly stammered, I promise, no funny business. You'll have your own room, but I'd feel better knowing you weren't battling a leaking roof in the dark. Amy blinked, shock crossing her face. She half laughed nervously. That's a big offer. We barely know each other. He swallowed, nodding. I know, but it's midnight, no hotels are open, and your building looks a step away from total blackout. I won't press you, but I thought I should offer. She exhaled, mind spinning. Instinct told her to preserve her independence, but practicality glared. This storm could last all night, and her building was an unpredictable hazard zone. Her phone was dead, no neighbors seemed awake. With a trembling breath, she accepted. All right, she murmured. I can't believe I'm saying this, but sure. Relief coursed through him. Thank you for trusting me, he said softly. We'll swing by your place so you can grab some clothes if that's feasible in this flood. She nodded. They hurried out, the courtyard ankle-deep in water. She dashed upstairs, returning minutes later with a small duffel bag, hair plastered to her face. Then, bracing against the wind, they ran back to his car, hearts pounding as lightning illuminated the sky. Soon they were on the road again, forging an unlikely alliance in the face of the storm's fury. The route to Gray's townhouse took them through partially flooded intersections. He navigated with caution, ignoring the occasional flash of hazard lights from stranded cars. By the time they pulled up to a quiet tree-lined street of upscale residences, the sky was a wrathful tapestry of black clouds, swirling wind, and unrelenting rain. His townhouse stood behind a wrought iron gate, a contemporary facade of glass and stone, typically admired for its architectural elegance. Tonight, it was barely visible in the gloom. Gray punched in a security code, driving into a small covered carport. The overhead sensor light flicked on, illuminating the raindrops that cascaded off the roof in silver streams. Amy gazed in awe, half-soaked coat clutched to her chest. You really do live here alone? Her voice carried a tremor of wonder. The building exuded a quiet grandeur that signaled wealth without the brashness of a skyscraper penthouse. He cut the engine, turning to her. Yes, it's more space than I need, but I fell in love with the design. Let's get you inside. They dashed to the front door. Gray keyed in a second code, flipping the lock. Warm, automated lights flickered on, revealing an airy interior. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the living room, though heavy curtains were drawn against the storm. The floors were polished wood, accented by plush rugs. Subtle artwork hung on the walls, modern pieces that hinted at impeccable taste without gaudiness. Amy stepped in, dripping water onto the entry mat, cheeks flushed from cold. Wow, I've never been anywhere like this. Her eyes kept darting to the soaring ceiling. He set her duffel on a marble bench, ignoring the water pooling beneath them. Don't worry about the floor. Let's get you warm first. Upstairs, second door on the left, is a guest room. The bathroom's en suite. You can shower, change. I'll find towels, clothes if needed. She nodded gratefully. Thank you, Gray. Really. Minutes later, she disappeared into the guest suite, astonished by the well-appointed bathroom. Heated tiles, a glass-enclosed shower with multiple jets. She let the hot water pound her sore muscles, reflections swirling in her mind about how the day had spiraled from ordinary to something near cinematic. She'd been trudging in a storm, resigned to face a soggy, powerless night, and now stood in a near-spa environment courtesy of a man who exuded quiet sadness behind a polished exterior. Meanwhile, Gray rummaged in a linen closet, retrieving extra towels, a fresh t-shirt, and sweatpants that might fit her. He set them near the guest room door, calling a soft, "They're here." He tried not to dwell on the fact that an attractive stranger was showering in his house. The day's events felt surreal, yet strangely purposeful. After 20 minutes, she emerged in the borrowed clothes, hair damp but somewhat tamed. She found him in the open-plan kitchen, which glowed under recessed lights. He'd changed out of his soaked suit as well, wearing casual lounge pants and a plain sweater. She noted how the casual attire made him appear more human, not just the stoic money man who'd rescued her from the roadside. He offered a tentative smile. I made some tea, mint, if that's okay. Her shoulders sagged in relief. Perfect. Together they carried steaming mugs to the living room, settling on a plush sectional sofa that faced a large window. Wind rattled outside, but the thick glass held firm. She curled up, sipping tea with both hands, feeling tension slip from her body. The hush of the storm outside seemed to wrap them in a cocoon. Gray turned on a gentle lamp, leaving the rest of the space in shadows. Amy saw his gaze drift to a framed photo on a nearby shelf, a younger Gray with an older man, presumably his father. She sensed a flicker of pain cross his face before he forced a neutral expression. She decided to break the silence softly. You look exhausted. Rough day at work? He exhaled, swirling the tea in his mug. More like a rough few months, he admitted. Business is fine, ironically, but I lost my dad not too long ago. We were close. Since then, it's like part of me can't settle. He paused, glancing at the photo. He taught me everything: investment strategies, risk management. Now that he's gone, I felt aimless. Amy's heart squeezed with empathy. I'm so sorry. Grief can be heavy. When I lost my grandma, I threw myself into double shifts at the cafe to avoid feeling it, but it still caught up with me. He nodded, resonating with her words. The admission slipped out before he could guard himself. Work is the only thing that keeps me from facing the emptiness. She reached out, gently laying a hand on his forearm. That emptiness doesn't vanish just because you bury it. You know that. A shaky breath escaped him. I do, but it's easier said than done. A tender hush fell, uniting them in shared vulnerability. She gave his arm a small squeeze. Look, I'm not a therapist, but if you ever need a sounding board, she offered a wry smile, I can whip up coffee and pastries while you vent. To his own surprise, he found a flicker of genuine amusement. And here I thought I was rescuing you from the storm. Maybe it's the other way around. Her lips curved, eyes warm with understanding. They let the quiet envelop them. The storm outside reduced to a distant roar. In that hush, Gray felt more seen than he had in years. He realized with a strange ache that maybe letting someone else in wasn't so terrifying after all. When the sun rose, the storm had passed. Pale winter light seeped through the parted curtains. Gray awoke earlier than expected, startled to find he'd actually slept well. The usual insomnia had relented. He found a note on the kitchen island. Morning, and thanks again. Found some coffee pods, made a small pot. Amy. He stepped into the living room, discovering her gazing out the window at the glistening aftermath, puddles shining on the streets, the sky a crisp winter blue. She turned at his approach, a gentle curve to her lips. Hey, I was just admiring your view. Hard to believe how violent the storm was just hours ago. He nodded, noticing how the borrowed t-shirt and sweatpants dwarfed her frame. Yeah, quite the difference. I hope you slept okay? She smiled. Better than I have in weeks. Thank you for letting me crash here. I might have woken up to a soaked mattress and freezing apartment otherwise. He warmed milk for the coffee, then they perched at a small breakfast bar. She sipped quietly, glancing at the time. I should probably head back soon, see if my apartment's still standing. He frowned, not quite ready for her to vanish. I can drive you, he offered. And maybe later I can help fix any damage, if that's not too forward. A flicker of gratitude crossed her face. That's sweet, Gray, but I don't want to impose. I'm sure you have a busy day. He exhaled, recalling the usual swirl of corporate tasks. I do, but I can spare a bit. It's the least I can do after kidnapping you last night. A playful grin tugged at his lips. She laughed, tension easing. You're serious? He nodded. I am. And so, after a light breakfast, they set off, returning to her part of town. The roads were still messy, some tree branches down, but traffic resumed its regular hum. When they reached her apartment complex, the floodwaters had receded, leaving muddy puddles. She guided him up the creaking stairs to her second-floor unit. Her apartment was tiny. A single bedroom, cramped living space, a small bathroom. Sure enough, the power was still out. She rummaged for a flashlight, groaning at the water stains by a window. It leaks sometimes, but I usually catch it with buckets, she muttered in embarrassment. Gray, to his own surprise, found the place somewhat endearing. It was cluttered with mismatched furniture, secondhand books, and a few watercolor paintings on the walls. A battered coffee table bore an old laptop and half-finished sketches. Despite the drab setting, something about her personal touches, notes pinned on the fridge, a cheerful mug collection, spoke of warmth. She sighed, flicking the flashlight around. No major damage, just damp floors. I'll need to wipe it up. Gray insisted on helping. She let him fetch old towels from a closet, standing on them to soak water by the window. He teased about how the towels had cartoon prints. She teased back about never imagining a big shot in a suit sopping up storm water in her tiny living room. And so, a morning that could have been awkward or humiliating became oddly comfortable. Two near strangers bridging the gap of social class through a shared mundane chore. Once the worst puddles were dealt with, she flicked off the flashlight, leading him back to the living area. She paused, clearly uncertain if she should ask him to stay for coffee once the power came back. He sensed the hesitation, so he gently offered, I should head to the office soon. But can I see you again, maybe for dinner? Or a coffee that doesn't involve a crisis? Her eyes lit, relief and a touch of excitement shining. I'd like that, she said softly, rummaging for a pen to scribble her number on a slip of paper. Here. I can't imagine you memorizing it, Mr. CEO, she teased lightly. He chuckled, pocketing the note. I'll call you. Or text. Probably text. I'm always in meetings. She walked him to the door, the building corridor still dimly lit by battery-powered emergency lights. He hesitated, fiddling with his car keys. Thanks again for last night. I know it was me offering you a ride, but you ended up helping me more than I expected. She tilted her head in curiosity. In what way? He swallowed, voice hushed. Showing me there's more to life than the bubble I'm trapped in. Let's just say it's been a tough year. Sympathy lit her gaze. I'm glad I could help. She reached out, giving his hand a small squeeze. The fleeting contact sent warmth up his arm. Then they parted. Gray returned to his car, feeling a swirl of optimism and longing, the knowledge that maybe his world had shifted ever so slightly on its axis. When Gray walked into Harris and Shaw's sleek headquarters that afternoon, suit pressed, hair still damp from earlier exertions, he felt oddly lighter. Usually, stepping off the executive elevator conjured an automatic tension, like stepping onto a stage. But now, memories of the morning's simple chores with Amy overshadowed the usual stress. He found himself smiling at staff, actually listening to greetings. His CFO, Robert, noticed the shift. Big meeting tomorrow with the Weston Group, sir, Robert reminded him. Also, the Asia market call is at 9 p.m. Are you prepared? Gray nodded. We'll handle it, but let's not skip the philanthropic committee check-in either. Make sure that's on the schedule. Robert blinked. Of course. Typically, philanthropic tasks were overshadowed by big deals in Gray's hectic routine. The CFO recognized a new priority that might indicate a shift, but he refrained from comment. That evening, after a marathon meeting, Gray found himself alone in his office, city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stared at spreadsheets for a looming acquisition, but found his mind drifting back to Amy. Her resilience, the calm way she teased him, how she spoke of her design ambitions. He realized he wanted to see her world, the small cafe she worked at, her sketches, the people in her life. He typed a short text. Hey, how's the power at your place? Everything okay? The reply came swiftly. Power's back. Place is mostly dry. My shift ends at 6 tomorrow. Dinner after? He smiled, tension in his chest easing. Sounds perfect, he replied. Little by little, the unwavering gloom that had settled after his father's death began to crack, allowing slivers of hope. The next day, Gray decided to pick Amy up from her cafe. Arriving at 5:55 p.m., he found Sunrise Roast and Bistro, a modest spot with only 10 tables, a chalkboard listing daily specials, and a bright mural of coffee beans across one wall. He stepped in, noticing the hum of conversation, the clatter of cups. A wave of curiosity from patrons greeted him, a man in a tailored suit clearly out of place. Amy bustled behind the counter, finishing an order for a harried mom with 2 kids. She spotted Gray and tossed him a warm grin. Give me 5 minutes to close up. He nodded, taking a seat near a corner. He observed how she handled customers with genuine kindness, a quiet empathy that made each interaction personal. He realized this was second nature to her, the same protective vibe she'd shown the teenage clerk in the grocery store. Soon, she shed her apron, flipping the open sign to closed for the evening. They left together, stepping into the cool twilight. She led him a few blocks away to a small diner she frequented, known for homemade soup and thick-cut fries. He teased that he'd buy, citing how last time they cooked at his place. She accepted only after a comedic standoff about splitting the check. In the cozy diner booth, they each ordered the day's soup special. Chicken barley for him, tomato basil for her, and a side of fries. The hush of the dinner crowd gave them a bubble of privacy. She asked about his father again, though gently. He felt a pang of sorrow, but also a willingness to open up. He described how his father had raised him single-handedly after his mother passed away early. They'd bonded over numbers, business strategies, travels. He was my hero, Gray murmured, stirring soup. But then, near the end, he got sick quickly. I was too busy finalizing a major deal in Europe. I barely made it back in time. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just dropped everything earlier. Amy listened, eyes shining with compassion. Gray, you didn't know how serious it was. You can't shoulder that guilt alone. He sighed. That's what everyone says, but it's haunted me. Work became my escape, but it's felt meaningless. She reached across the table, letting her fingers brush his hand. I can't fix that pain, but I'm here to remind you that life is more than the next deal. You're allowed to hurt, and you're also allowed to find new joys. Touched by her sincerity, he squeezed her hand. Thank you. The hush between them felt charged, the unspoken truth that they'd found comfort in each other's presence. After dinner, they ambled outside, a gentle breeze stirring. He offered to drive her home, but she proposed walking a few blocks first. The evening air felt pleasant, a stark contrast to the storm that first bound them. Beneath the soft glow of street lamps, they strolled past small shops. Chatting easily about everything from comedic cafe mishaps to the politics of large corporations, they discovered a synergy in perspective. She was no fan of corporate greed, but believed in using success to uplift communities. He found her moral clarity refreshing, fueling a desire to re-examine how his company operated. They paused by a park bench, a half-moon illuminating the quiet street. Gray overcame a swell of emotion, turning to Amy. You know, he began, voice low, I never realized how lonely I was until I met you. It's like you see me for who I am, not just my title or bank account. She blushed, stepping closer. I see a kind man who invests more than money, someone willing to help a stranger in a storm. I'm still amazed you even bothered. He swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm glad I did, because you're helping me heal, Amy, more than anything or anyone else has. She rose on tiptoe, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek, her breath a warm whisper in the night air. I'm here, Gray. They lingered in that hush, city noise muffled in the distance, hearts forging an unspoken promise that neither took lightly. In the following weeks, Gray invited Amy to glimpses of his daily realm, boardroom lunches, philanthropic galas, small corporate receptions. She approached each event with curiosity, refusing to be cowed by his high-powered colleagues. Some glared with mild suspicion at this unknown girlfriend. Others found her sincerity a refreshing break from the typical yes-men. One philanthropic dinner nearly overwhelmed her with polished guests and swirling wine. She clung to Gray's arm, leaning on his quiet reassurance. He introduced her graciously, never downplaying her achievements or overshadowing her modest background. She recognized the tension in some guests' eyes, the unspoken question, what does he see in her? But Gray dismissed their silent judgments with subtle gestures of solidarity. That night, after the event, they retreated to his townhouse, collapsing on the sofa with leftover canapes. She teased him about the stiff formality, and he teased her about being a better conversationalist than half the socialites. Both recognized that bridging these worlds would take effort, but neither doubted it was worth it. She also welcomed him deeper into her domain. The tiny design class she'd started attending on off days, the local artisan markets she loved. On a sunny Saturday, she dragged him to an open-air craft fair, introducing him to local artisans who sold homemade soaps, crocheted scarves, and baked treats. Gray found the unpretentious warmth strangely exhilarating. Nobody recognized him as a finance mogul. He bought a handcrafted mug, telling her it was better than any fancy brand. In each environment, they discovered new facets of each other. He realized she yearned to expand her design skills, maybe start a small creative studio. She realized he wanted more from his wealth than just profit. He yearned to do good, to connect, to prove he was more than a mercenary investor. Despite their blossoming relationship, Gray's old grief flared at times. Late at night, after particularly tough board meetings or philanthropic squabbles, he'd retreat into a shell, eyes distant, weighed by regrets about his father. Sometimes, in half-sleep, he'd dream of the last weeks of his father's life, replaying the guilt of not being there sooner. Amy noticed how he'd drift, how tenseness coiled in him. She gently coaxed him to speak, reminding him that burying sorrow wouldn't end it. He'd sigh, admitting he often felt he was living out his father's blueprint, unsure if he was forging his own path or just chasing a ghost. One evening, after a silent dinner, she quietly said, "You don't have to do this alone, Gray. Maybe you can see a grief counselor?" He hesitated. He disliked showing vulnerability to outside parties. but her unwavering concern wore down his defenses. He nodded, promising to consider it. She offered to stand by him if he found a counselor. He felt an odd rush of relief. At the same time, Harris and Shaw faced a potential meltdown. A major client threatened to withdraw billions over rumored ethical concerns. The board demanded Gray compromise certain philanthropic lines to appease them. Torn between preserving the firm's bottom line and maintaining the moral approach that was part of his father's final wishes, Gray wrestled with a sense of déjà vu. Amy's words echoed in his mind. You have the power to shape how your wealth impacts others. Summoning that courage, he refused the client's demands. The client walked away, rattling stock values briefly, but Gray's conscience felt clearer than ever. He told the board this was the new standard. We're not going to sacrifice integrity for a quick profit. Back in his townhouse, he recounted the day's crisis to Amy, voice trembling with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. She beamed with pride, hugging him fiercely. That's the leadership that sets you apart, Gray, she whispered. He felt validated in a way no quarterly profit spike had ever given him. Winter storms mellowed into spring's drizzles. The date marking the 1-year anniversary of his father's passing loomed. Usually, Gray would bury himself in deals, ignoring the ache. This time, with Amy's gentle encouragement, he arranged a small gathering at a community garden his father once supported. A few close associates joined, planting a commemorative tree to honor the man who started Gray on his path. Amy stood by his side, her presence a quiet anchor. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered a brief reflection about how he realized success was hollow without empathy. He offered a vow to continue philanthropic expansions in memory of his father. The short ceremony concluded with a hush that felt purifying. Afterwards, Amy walked with him along the garden's winding path, arms wrapped around his waist. "You've come so far," she murmured, pressing her cheek to his shoulder. "I'm proud of you." He swallowed thick emotion, gazing at the new sapling. "Couldn't have done it without you." That night, they cuddled in front of his townhouse fireplace, sipping hot cocoa. She was flipping through design catalogs, daydreaming about opening her own mini studio. He watched her, heart brimming with affection. "You know," he said softly, "I have resources if you want them, no strings attached. I just want to see you succeed." She set the catalog down, meeting his eyes. "Gray, I appreciate that more than words can say, but you also know I value forging my own path. Let me try to get there on my own grit, at least partially." He nodded, smiling. "Understood. But never forget you have my full support, whichever route you take. In any case, I believe in your talent." She leaned over, pressing a kiss to his temple. "Thank you." And thus they found equilibrium, a place where he respected her independence and she accepted his unconditional willingness to help if needed. T'es insane. Over subsequent months, Gray and Amy seamlessly blended their lives. She occasionally stayed at his townhouse, stocking the fridge with simple groceries, giggling at how the staff might raise eyebrows at her presence. He overcame his wariness of being taken advantage of, comforted by her unwavering sincerity. She had never once asked for anything, not even after discovering he was a billionaire. She continued part-time design classes, meticulously saving tips from the cafe to fund future art software or printing equipment. Gray quietly, behind the scenes, lined up philanthropic grants that might benefit local arts entrepreneurs, hoping it would eventually dovetail with her ambitions. He also progressed in therapy sessions, letting go of guilt about his father, forging a new sense of identity that balanced ambitious leadership with heartfelt vulnerability. Near summer, on a day the weather forecast threatened storms reminiscent of that night they met, Gray decided the timing was poetic. He planned a simple day trip to a scenic lookout outside the city, a place with rolling hills and a vantage of the horizon. They drove out in late afternoon, the sky tinted with approaching storm clouds. She teased him about risking a repeat of their original fiasco, but he said it was part of the charm. Stormy weather seemed to be their lucky sign. They arrived at the lookout, stepping onto a grassy ridge. Clouds loomed overhead, swirling with potential thunder. She marveled at the broad panorama, the city's skyline at a distance, farmland patchwork below. Gray set down a small picnic hamper, ignoring the ominous rumble in the distance. Amy laughed. We might get drenched again. He shrugged with a playful grin. I can think of worse ways to recapture old memories. The wind picked up, rustling her hair. He took her hands, eyes shining with emotion. Amy, from the moment I stopped for you in that storm, you've done more than warm my car seat. You warmed my life. You rescued me from a storm of another kind, the emptiness I'd carried since Dad's passing. I want you by my side forever, to face every calm day, every raging storm together. Her heart hammered, tears brimming. Gray, are you saying? He sank to one knee, retrieving a small, elegant ring box from his pocket. Her gasp echoed the thunder overhead. Flicking it open, he revealed a delicately set diamond ring, tasteful yet undeniably beautiful. Amy Dawson, will you marry me? He asked, voice trembling with a mix of nerves and overflowing love. She let out a breathy laugh sob, nodding fervently. Yes, Gray, of course. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they sealed it with a tender kiss. Just then, thunder roared, raindrops beginning to patter around them. They laughed, gathering their hamper hastily as the heavens opened. Racing back to the car, half-soaked and thoroughly giddy, they realized they'd come full circle. A stormy introduction culminating in a stormy proposal. A testament that sometimes the greatest gifts arrive drenched in rain. Their wedding, a few months later, blended quiet intimacy with genuine celebration. Gray insisted on a modest ceremony in a glass-walled greenhouse near the city's arboretum, reminiscent of the vantage and the growth he'd experienced. Amy wore a simple lace gown, hair pinned with small wildflowers. He stood in a tailored suit that somehow matched the rustic chic ambiance, the reflection of greenery dancing across the floor. Friends from all walks of life attended. Her cafe coworkers, design classmates, his board members, philanthropic partners, even a few loyal staff from his father's era, teary-eyed at seeing Gray truly happy. A subtle hush fell as they spoke vows laced with references to that fateful storm, how she saved him from spiritual emptiness, and how he gave her the space to believe in her artistry. They departed the ceremony for a short honeymoon in a lakeside cabin, no lavish overseas extravaganza. She teased him about being surprisingly low-key for a billionaire. He teased back that a quiet lake had more healing power than any private island. Their days were filled with hikes, reading, and slow cooking, forging a deeper sense of unity far from the city's bustle. Upon returning, Gray reorganized certain aspects of Harris and Shaw to reflect a more empathetic approach. He integrated mental health policies, championed scholarships for employees' families, small shifts but significant. He also expanded philanthropic efforts, occasionally involving Amy's budding design services for awareness campaigns. Observers noted that Harris and Shaw pivoted to a more people-centered ethos, prompting some in the corporate world to follow suit. Amy, for her part, found new confidence in her artistry, continuing to refine her dream of opening a small design studio or creative hub. The influx of wedding gifts from Gray's network included advanced art software and hardware, though she insisted on paying for part of it. He respected her unwavering independence, seeing in it a mirror of the unstoppable spirit she'd shown that stormy night. On their one-year anniversary, the forecast called for storms again. Laughing, they decided to drive the same highway where Gray had first spotted her trudging along. Sure enough, the downpour came, lightning slicing the sky. They parked under a sturdy awning, stepping out into the drizzle. He pulled her close, ignoring the wind that plastered clothes to their skin. I guess we never outgrew storms. He joked, cupping her cheek. She laughed, eyes shining with affection. We face them together now, remember? They kissed in the rain, a reaffirmation that storms were no longer menacing. They had conquered them once, forging a bond that overcame old grief and new challenges alike. In the hush that followed, Gray's heart brimmed with gratitude. He'd found more than a fleeting rescue that fateful night. He'd found a partner who mended his broken spirit and reminded him that sometimes the best place to find healing is in offering someone else a ride, forging a quiet alliance that illuminates the darkest roads.